Every Sunday morning we say together our mission, which keeps us focused on what we're here for. We gather in community to nourish souls, transform lives, and do justice. This morning, Christians in our congregation and around the world are celebrating Easter, the day of Jesus Christ's resurrection. In the Christian faith story, by being resurrected from the dead or resurrecting himself from the dead, depending on how you're hearing it, he no longer is Rabbi Jesus, the teacher, but he becomes the Christ, the Savior of humanity. Often joining with my Christian cousins, brothers, sisters, I preach on a Christian theme on Easter, but today I'm going back farther than that to a 5,000-year-old story. The story of Ishtar. Some people say the holiday was named after her. I think maybe kind of it was, but it was probably more named after a Germanic version of her, Ostara, the goddess of the dawn and new beginnings. Her name is similar in many cultures: Astarte, Ashtaroth, Ostara, Ishtar. These were sailing people, these were traveling people, these were trading people, and you can well imagine the stories of the great goddess being brought to many far-flung lands. There's even a moon goddess, a birth goddess named Ixchel, who is a pre-Columbian Guatemalan goddess whose consort is a great giant rabbit. And she shares a similar story with Ishtar, the story of a descent into the underworld, being tormented for 3 days, and then reemerging from death, transformed. The story of Ishtar is a faith story that comes from the lands of Sumer and Babylon, the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, which is now Iraq. There is an ancient, lengthy poem that talks about Ishtar's descent into the underworld and her rebirth. And it begins, it doesn't begin with her birth, but all of her worshipers knew about her birth. She was born from the full moon after the spring equinox, which just happened this week. It's called Ishtar's egg. And when the full moon touched the river, it is said that the full moon broke open and Ishtar was born. The poem begins, it says, Ishtar bent her ear toward the underworld. The word in Sumerian in the Sumerian language for ear and wisdom is the same. And so it could be that she was just thinking about the underworld. But it was because her sister, Ereshkigal, lived in the underworld, and her husband, the lord of the underworld, had just died, and they were having a funeral for him down there, and Ishtar wanted to go to the funeral. Now, she and her sister didn't like each other much, but she's going to the funeral because, that's what we do. And she put on all of the trappings of her power. She put on her beautiful dress, her earrings, 7 things: a dress, earrings, a breastplate, a necklace, a belt around her waist, bracelets on her wrists and ankles, and a crown. She leaves her consort, the shepherd king Tammuz, and their 2 sons. She leaves her temples where the people worship her. She leaves her friends and her home, and she arrives at the outer gates of the underworld. And there she announces herself as Queen of Heaven on her way to the east. The chief gatekeeper of the underworld is skeptical and questions her. She replies that she wishes to descend into the underworld because her older sister, Ereshkigal, is there, and to witness the funeral rites of Ereshkigal's husband. So the gate is opened a crack, and the attendant says, "Take off your crown." She says, "Why?" And he says, "Quiet, Ishtar. The ways of the underworld are perfect and must not be questioned." So she takes off her crown. At the second gate, her earrings are removed from her ears. At the third gate, the necklace from her neck. At the fourth gate, the ornaments from her breast. At the fifth gate, the girdle from her waist. At the sixth gate, the bracelets from her hands and feet. And at the seventh gate, her clothing is taken. Ishtar protests at each symbol of her power and her beauty and her authority being stripped from her. But she's told this is the experience of everyone who descends into the underworld. And the ways of the underworld are perfect and must not be questioned. When her sister sees her, she's not overjoyed. In fact, it says she turns on Ishtar the eyes of death. You all have gotten that gaze from someone before. But since Erich Kegel is mistress of the underworld, her gaze gives you diseases and makes you suffer and insults you and accuses you and kills you. And the story goes on. Ishtar's corpse is hung on a meat hook in her sister's room for 3 days. Her faithful handservant, who is a warrior woman and her advisor, charges 2 small animals to disguise themselves as flies and go down and get her. She says to them, "You will hear the queen of the underworld grieving and moaning as if she is in pain. Moan with her, and she will favor you. She will want to give you a gift. Ask for Ishtar's body. When you get the body, sprinkle this food of life and this water of life on her body, and she will return to life and come back with you." They did as she asked. And Ishtar, alive again, was allowed to leave with the little flies. Attached to her, though, and you know this is often the case when somebody hits bottom, they come back, but there's other stuff with them. She has 2 demons attached to her. And the demons demand that she send a replacement for herself down to the underworld. She doesn't know who to choose. But when she gets back home and she finds her husband ruling, having fun, not having missed her very much, apparently. And suddenly it becomes clear to her whom she should side. His sister is distressed and she says, "No, send me instead." And so, apparently it's okay with her brother, but they end up taking turns. She's in the underworld for 6 months, and then he is in the underworld for 6 months, and they rotate like that forever. Now, Ishtar and Tammuz are among the many dying and rising gods throughout human religious history. Osiris, Dionysius, Krishna, many of them were born of a virgin. Many of them were born in a cave, threatened with death when they were babies, and adored as having saved the world and humanity through their suffering. This is not a news story. Ishtar's worshippers in the land between the rivers would rise at dawn on the day of the first full moon after the equinox, and they would greet the dawn and go to the river to worship, and their children would find eggs that they had hidden, Ishtar's eggs. And they told the children that the eggs came from the rabbit in the moon. Have you ever looked at the moon and seen a rabbit? Now, I'm not talking about this in order to mock anybody's religion. I'm not saying, oh, those, silly people who worship as if this were true. No, I'm saying, look at this, how powerful this story is. Look at how deeply ingrained in the human psyche is the story of death and resurrection, even of the divine one. We all experience it. Every single thing in earth falls to the ground and comes up again. The animal dies, the animal is eaten, the birds or whoever eats it, spreads its carbon on the fields, and the carbon gets to be part of the plants, and then the plants are then eaten, and those animals are then eaten, and it goes on and on. It's a round. So everything really is a part of everything else. That's not some kind of a mystical statement. It's kind of organic. Everything is part of everything else. You and I are no exceptions. So this story of resurrection is a continuing story of a cycle of death and rebirth. And we don't only experience it with agriculture. We don't only experience it with our own fleshly life. We experience it in our emotional lives and in our lives as they happen to us. Over and over again, we go down into the underworld and come back up again to some extent or other. Over and over again, we have an experience that feels like everything that is precious to us, everything that matters, has been stripped away. First one thing, and you think, surely that's enough. And no, here comes something else. And no, here's something else. And soon you're left with nothing. You don't even know who you are anymore. This is apparently part of human life. To the degree that sometimes when I'm counseling a person who's speaking of suicide, I will say it's possible, really, that part of your life does need to die off. Maybe you don't have to kill the whole thing. Just figure out what part needs to go and kill it. That part. Kill it, not literally. Or maybe you just need to play dead for a few days. I'm sorry, I cannot answer this email. I'm dead. Carry on without me. I'll be back. There are people in this room who are heroes and sheroes of life in that they have been stripped of everything and hit bottom completely. They've lost all their money, or they've lost their children, or they've lost their sanity, or they've lost every single thing that they know to be meaningful to them, and have come back transformed. Marianne Williamson, who's a famous spiritual teacher, says that a nervous breakdown is a highly underrated way to achieve enlightenment. So the Easter story is a story of losing everything, and you feel sick to your soul, and hope seems absurd, and part of you has died, and you're in the dark. Now, when I approach a sacred story, a faith story, as you know, I approach it as if it were a dream. And the way I was trained to read dreams, everything in the dream is you. So Ishtar is you, and Erich Kegel is you, and the little flies are you, and everything is a part of you. It's one way to read the story, whether it's true or not. My teacher used to say, "Oh, Meg, quit worrying about whether it's true. Is it insight producing?" You know how Jungians are. So part of you has died, and something in you sends a tiny little buzzing down in there, and you hear it. And something wakes up. And there is some kind of food or water that is sprinkled on you, and you come back to life and walk out again, sometimes dragging demons with you. Is it just a human dynamic? Is it just an earth agricultural dynamic? I don't know, but it is deep in the human psyche, and we talk about it in our religions throughout history. There is got mad a couple years ago. There's a evangelical Christian humor magazine called the Wittenberg Door. It's just called The Door now. And they were kind of mocking people like me who equate Easter with nature cycles. And the words of a hymn that they wrote in the magazine say, "Jesus Christ is risen today, alleluia." But in the title, they crossed out the word Easter, and they put in "Pretty Yellow Flower Day." And in the verse, they cross out "is risen" and write, "may or may not be risen." Pretty Yellow Flower Day. I wanted to write them a letter entitled, "Your Mama's a Pretty Little Yellow Flower." How dare they scorn a yellow flower when it goes through the same things that Ishtar did? The same things any dying and rising God does. The same things humans do. It has to abandon its beauty, first losing its petals one by one, then its stem turning to slime, its seeds buried in the cold, cold ground for a time, the water there tormenting it until the seed breaks open, and then a little part of it, haunted by the sun, makes its way through the dark earth and is tiny and vulnerable until it grows again into its strength and beauty. That's a rough journey. Our babies that we saw today went through a rough journey to get here. They were in the dark for a long time, and then they fight their way out. It's dangerous for everybody, hazardous, harrowing. And they come out into the light. And we too will all go back to the earth when our time has run. Even the babies, I hope, after 100 years. As faith stories, these proclaim that the Divine One is willing to descend into the underworld, stripped of everything divine, and to go through the same thing the pretty yellow flowers do, and the same thing we do, same thing the animals do, suffer with us. And as they emerge, they conquer the power of death. The gods show us the way and teach us that there are pathways from here to there, and teach us that the great round continues. Behold the mystery. All that dies shall be reborn. May it be so in your life and in mine.